Welcome for some more hawk and hatchet content. The tool we're looking at today I featured and talked about in previous videos, and apparently it got enough of your attention that some of you requested I get to a review sooner rather than later. In those previous videos I mentioned that this was a tool I carried, used a lot. It came in really handy for a lot of tasks during the difficult move into the new place last year, at least within its limitations. And we're talking about the SOG. Well, they call it their camp axe, but also their compact hatchet. I'm going to call it their compact hatchet because I have trouble calling anything this size an axe. So let's talk about where it's really worked for me, what it doesn't do so well, and yes, one significant vulnerability in the design. Starting out, all of my other SOG hawks came with these open-top nylon carry sheaths that I'm not a big fan of. The hatchet just came with a polymer mask, and it works just fine to protect me from the keen edge when I'm carrying it, and to carry it I'll just slip it into a belt loop or ring like I would carry any other hammer or hatchet when I'm working. So that works just fine. I do have a couple of issues with this though, and the first one is really minor and probably all me, and that's that the mask fits on pretty much equally well in either direction. So I often slip it on upside down and then realize the SOG logo is backwards. Is that an issue? Probably not. Again, I don't see any real difference in the fit or the protection it gives me. The bigger issue though, if I put it back on the right way, is that it is secured by this long thin rubber strap, which you stretch around the back of the handle, and there are some sharpish edges right there, and then you hook it to the SOG logo stud on the opposite side. And so far it's worked, but I'm pretty confident that over time this is going to break down, degrade, and fail. And I think SOG prepared for that because it's secured with a couple of little screws. So could I get a replacement part from SOG? We're definitely going to talk about that later in the video. But I'm not really worried about it because without the strap, that's a really secure fit. I don't feel like it's going anywhere. I don't feel unsafe if it's not strapped. And if I did, I could probably just rig up another retention system. Alright, let me go ahead and throw a bunch of stats at you, and then we'll talk about where this has really worked for me, what it doesn't do so well, and yes, my one major concern. And we're going to start with how much did I pay for it. Shop around because prices have been flexing a lot. But I think currently on Amazon these are going for around $53 US. And for that I'm getting a compact hatchet with a stainless steel head. The SOG has not been terribly forthcoming about what kind of stainless steel, but looking through multiple product listings, they will occasionally specify 3CR13 MOV. Is that what this is? I don't know. And maybe they are not specifying because there might be, well, different steels in their manufacturing chain. If you know more about that, let me know in the comments. But whatever this is made out of, it is a stainless steel, and my test files are saying that edge is around 52 HRC, which for me makes for a good durable choppy tool that would also have pretty good edge retention. And you're going to see that in the testing. The handle though, like the other SOG hawks I have, is GRN, and we're definitely going to talk about that. But looking down at my notes to give you the metric as well as the imperial. The weight is a shave over 1 pound, 454 grams, which makes for a nice light carry, but we're definitely going to be talking about how important weight distribution is in terms of a choppy tool. Especially one of this length. Overall length is 11.5 inches, 29 centimeters, so a little bigger than some of those mini hawks and hatchets I started the series with that were kind of frustrating. And yes, in previous videos, I did sort of set my own parameters. I felt like a hawker hatchet needs to be at least 12 inches long to work for me. But again, weight distribution's important. Being a little bit shorter, again, does make for easy carry. But we need to talk about the head. So the bit length is a reasonably generous 2 3/4 inches, 7 centimeters. The length front to back, bit to pawl, is 5 inches, 12.5 centimeters. But the really important perspective is looking at it this way. Okay, the cheeks behind the bit really thinned out, very much like a tomahawk, with a very keen edge bevel on there. But this is again where you get the weight distribution as compared to, well, I reviewed several of those thin slab o' steel hawks and hatchets that just have a couple of handle scales slapped on, and how frustrating some of those performed as compared to ones that had better weight distribution because of more substantial heads. And yeah, the head of this one widens out to the point that at the handle and also at the hammer pawl on the back, that's 5/8 of an inch thick. So 16 millimeters, putting the point of balance right up here towards the top of that reinforcing collar. Let's take a quick look at that really keen SOG edge. And yes, I have had to refresh it as I've used it, but not after every use. Where is it now? Again, I've had this thing for about 1.5 years. That's pretty slicey for a hatchet. That's some cardboard. Yeah. And that will give you a sense of what it's been useful for, at least for me. Before we get to the test battery, I wanted to talk about where this tool has served me well, especially as I've mentioned during the difficult move into the new place, which included getting the new place ready. It's an old house with a big forest of a backyard, and let's say that both had been neglected to one degree or another. So there were things that needed to be done before we moved everything in. And first off, this was an easy tool to carry, even in tight spaces like the attic and the crawl space, so it was at hand. And because it's also compact, it was also useful in tight restrictive spaces. Well, for what? It has a very keen edge and enough mass behind that head that it is a pretty good light chopping tool. And I'm not going to use it for bigger jobs, but for its size, it's pretty useful, and then you're going to see that in the test results. But another thing I could do with it is choke up on it, because it's got this nice beard undercut here. I can get my hand behind that keen edge to use it as a scraper, shaver, a plane, or do certain kinds of cutting and chiseling with it. Yeah, it came in really handy for that. But the third function, the job I actually probably used it for more than the other two, was, again, in tight spaces for small jobs, using that hammer pawl as, well, an actual hammer. Yeah, that came in really handy. Well, what's my big concern with it, though? Well, you probably already figured it out, and it's the same thing with the other SOG hawks and hatchets that are built like this with these GRN handles. The tang of the head goes down to about there. It's secured with a couple of screws and this reinforcing collar. So the risk is it's going to break about right there. The other thing I have noticed, the more I do heavier chopping tasks with it, is it does kind of loosen up. So far I've been able to adjust it and tighten it back up again. But I am definitely nervous, especially since I like this tool so much, that it's only going to be a matter of time with use that it's going to break. Now, other hatchets and tomahawks that have glass-filled handles, or more traditional ones with hickory handles, there are usually readily available replacement handles on the market, but not with SOG. I haven't been able to find any. And when I did that Voodoo Hawk review about 3 weeks ago now, I specifically reached out to SOG customer service, identified myself as a YouTube reviewer, and asked about how do I get a replacement handle if one breaks. And I still haven't heard back from them. Taking you through the test results. Well, the only Marshall tests I ran were two. First, yes, I have been throwing it. I should probably add that to the list of things that it came in useful for when I was getting the house ready, was blowing off steam as soon as I had a target outside. I could use this among some of my other smaller hawks and hatchets to do some throwing. And it's not bad. If I hit straight on the bit, though, it might bounce out, fall out under its own weight. If I get it toe on, it really does bite nicely. And for me, it has a natural rotation within like 12 to 14 feet. So it's a pretty fast turner. But the impact of throwing, and especially bad throwing, is one of the things that starts to loosen up the handle, and one of the places I'm afraid the thing is just going to break on me. So I don't do much throwing with this one compared to others that I feel, well, are either more solid or I can get a replacement handle for. I also did the bamboo test, and I'm not worried so much about inducing a chip or a roll, even though this is a really keen edge. But again, hitting that with the speed and rhythm I would normally use when I'm sparring fencing gives me a sense of the nimbleness, responsiveness of it as a martial tool, and it is really hard to hit that bamboo when it's bouncing around if I've only got less than 3 inches to make contact. So if I short stroke, I miss, and if I go long, I'm going to hook. And yeah, I could make use of that, but because this is such a short implement, I'm really worried that whatever I hook is going to wind up going straight into my knuckles. Utility tests. I already mentioned how I made use of the edge, and yeah, for carving, getting my hand behind it, I can make some use out of it. It's not as good as a knife. But if it's the thing at hand. Also, if I'm doing something that might abuse the edge of the knife or the geometry of a knife, let's say, I need something more plain or chisel-like to do the job. Again, there's work around the house I had to do that way. I could make some use out of it, and there was some cutting I could make use of with the different, the toe and the heel and the edge. So some use I could get out of it that not as good as a knife, but maybe in certain situations, I'd rather use this than a knife. Moving up to light chopping. Well, one of the things I've been doing as we've been gardening is turning straight branches into plant stakes, and I can do that by carving like I would sharpen a pencil, but I can also do it with just very accurate chopping to whittle that tip down. And this is not bad for that. It's a very keen edge, and I can get some good accuracy out of it for fine chopping. Moving up to, okay, I've had to do a lot of tree trimming, and we're actually this year back in tree trimming season. I have branches of different diameters to break down. So when it comes to chopping thinner branches, yeah, this is a great tool for breaking down those thinner branches. Ivy, by the way. Into a knot. My biggest frustration with it is because it is so keen. If I'm chopping something I can easily chop through, or I miscalculate and it goes into my stump, it gets stuck and I have to pry the thing out on a regular basis. But that tells me it bites really well into material. Again, very thin behind that bit, very narrow cheeks there. Which then gets me to chopping bigger, thicker branches. For something that's about 2.5, 3 inches in diameter, this is a great tool. I just need to come at it from a couple of different angles off and make a bit of a wedge, but sometimes I can go clean through the thing. It depends on the wood and how green it is. Moving up to some bigger branches. Okay. Here's an example of me breaking down, and you can't tell. This is a fir branch that's about almost 4 inches in diameter, and that thing is about 8 feet long. You can't see it, so I'm struggling just to keep it on the block. I probably should have done it on the ground. So working my way around it. So I have to do it with a bigger tool, but this is pretty light. But yeah, picking it up and trying to chop through that. Would one of my bigger hatchets or hawks have done that job better? Absolutely yes. And for something like this, what I found is I'm using actually a very old tomahawk technique, is I will create a wedge and I'll just turn the log and work around it until I can chop through it with the smaller implement. So again, I can make it work. But impact loosens the head, and that's also a job. If I'm really hammering on something, I'm worried about, again, breakage. Speaking of hitting stuff, okay, so splitting wood. I would certainly recommend a more conventional axe or hatchet if I'm going to split anything big, but splitting some of these smaller logs. Two ways I can go at it. If I've got the log already split one way, I might be able to hit it from the side and split it. And this will penetrate very well and I can get some decent accuracy out of it, but it's not much of a wedge. So it's not really going to split the wood. And again, this is a situation where I found myself going clean through the log and getting my bit stuck in my stump. Longitudinal splitting. I actually prefer, if it's a smaller log, to do it with a knife. Because, well, if I don't have a good way to balance the thing on the stand, except with my hand, which I really don't want there. Getting a good accurate strike to split something, probably not going to work for me. I mean, I was able to make it work by basically sticking the thing into the log and then banging the whole thing down into the stump. But I found I had better luck treating this as if it was a big choppy field knife and sinking it into the end of the log and just batoning it through. Again, there's not much of a wedge there to facilitate splitting, but it's very keen, so it actually does go through the material with very minimal resistance. And the edge held up to all of that really well. It's the handle that scares me. Before we get to my thoughts on the Marshall potential for this tool, version of the conversation I usually have in my knife reviews, the balance between Marshall and utility that could also help you out potentially with optics. In this case, I'm going to say this definitely looks a whole lot more like a tool than a weapon, especially if I compare it to some of the tomahawks we've been looking at. So I don't think it would get unwanted attention. You happen to be going somewhere where there are people sensitive to you being armed, and some of those people might be law enforcement. If you've got this on a tool belt, on your pack, in your toolbox, well, if you're walking around with it downtown, that might get some unwanted attention. But as for the balance between Marshall and utility, I'm going to revisit at least what I feel is its utility potential. Kind of sum that up at the end, but let's go ahead and talk about how this might function as a Marshall tool compared to, say, one of those small tomahawks that we've looked at. All right, bear with my logic because I'm actually going to build my Marshall impressions on that balance between utility and Marshall usefulness. First off, because I'm putting this in the category of improvised weapon. Certainly primarily designed to be a tool, but like other tools of this type, other hatchets, hammers, you could employ them for the other thing if you needed to in a pinch, and this is what you had at hand. But also using it as a tool has kind of informed my Marshall impressions, starting with, well, the confidence I have in this head design. Not only what I could do with the edge and, yeah, the toe and the hammer pawl, but having enough mass in it without making it unwieldy, unbalanced, hard to control and recover. Yeah, it gives me a lot of confidence in this, especially as compared to a lot of those other compact hawks and hatchets we looked at that are those thin slabs of steel with the handle scales bolted on. Those definitely designed to be more weapon than tool, but I think this actually works better than a lot of those, at least for me. The other thing that I learned from handling it as a tool is how controllable, nimble, responsive it is. So when I apply it to martial practice, again, as compared to some of those compact hawks and hatchets that were designed primarily to be weapons, not tools, this moves for me just so much better. I really love the way this feels when I'm moving it around, drilling and practicing with it. And what I can get out of it, again, confidence in what I can do, striking with it for its size. We'll talk about size limitations in a minute. The chop, the slash, I realize I didn't do any tip slashing tests, but I feel like I have a nice sharp toe there I could do that with. Being able to push or thrust with the top of it, use that hammer pawl. Now, length restriction in this grip, we have to talk about that. Defensive application, well, we talked about that I do need to be accurate in landing a short bit on a target. If I short stroke it, I'm going to miss. If I long stroke it, overreach, I'm going to hook. Now, can I use hooking martially? Absolutely. But because this is short, like other implements of this length that we've talked about, I'm really worried that whatever I'm hooking could easily wind up on my fingers. So if it's sharp or bone breaking, okay, if I'm hooking a limb that's kind of soft, I'm not so worried about it. But hooking another weapon, that makes me nervous. So yeah, that might limit my willingness to use it defensively. Also, you know, it doesn't have a whole lot of mass and size that I would really feel confident parrying, especially a heavy incoming strike. I just don't think it's going to stop anything like that. But when it comes to lighter strikes or dealing with somebody's guard, I do feel like I could countercut at it. I could swat at it with the flat or strike with combinations of the bit and the pawl and reversing actions. So I feel like I can get some usefulness out of it, again, within its size limitations. I'm really going to have to rely on what the rest of me is doing or what I might have in my other hand to complement it with. But in other grips, let's get back to that edge, that head design. Forward grip choked up. Using it as a tool, I feel like I could get a pretty good punch with the bit or slash, or the equivalent of a ridge hand strike with the top of it. If I happen to have it in that high grip reversed, it's that sort of upside down karambit sort of thing, I feel like, again, I could punch with it, I could slash with the corners of the toe, or very powerful hammer blow knife hand strike with the top of the head. So it does have potential within its size limitations, but I think it actually punches above those size limitations because of, well, the mass in the head and how keen that edge is. But let's close by going back to its utility usefulness. All right, SOG calling it their camp axe or compact hatchet. Specifically, let's talk about camp axe. If I'm using this as a tool around the property, and I'm using it hard, and eventually one day, I'm pretty certain it's going to break on me. Well, if I'm around the property, it's going to make me sad. I'm going to drop the bits off in my workshop to maybe get around to making a replacement handle, and then I'm going to go pick up another tool and get back to work. If I'm out camping, and this is my one choppy tool, and it breaks on me, I'm kind of SOL. I would definitely want to have as a backup, well, maybe a bigger hatchet, depending on what I'm willing to carry where I'm going to do heavier chopping. In that case, why do I really need this? Or a sizable choppy field knife could take over for this should it break in the field. So I'm going to say, especially for what this thing costs, you have better options if you're thinking about using this camping or for any other extended trip out in the wilderness. Yeah, if this fails on you, wrong place, wrong time, you're basically going to just have a scraper left. So, all right, let's go ahead and cut the conversation off here. Let me know your thoughts on tools like this, or if you have any recommendations, definitely keep those coming. Otherwise, as always, thank you all so much for watching, liking, subscribing, following my journey, putting up with my madness, adding to our conversation, seeking me out on social media. We do have lots more hawks and hatchets. Most of them are significantly bigger that I have, therefore, a lot more confidence in coming up. There are more knives to review, and yes, as I mentioned, some swords I still need to get to.